KTN News. Get the whole story.
Whenever you see an expectant woman strutting around, there is a lot of things happening inside her and within her. Her body is a whole different world for the human being growing in her. In medical terms, the first trimester is usually regarded as the most critical, as a lot of development starts happening. Rare conditions like microcephalous are likely to affect the baby and last even after their birth. My name is Saad Hassan, and this week on Health Digest, we take a look at this condition, that is microcephalous, and how to make life worth living for the children living with it. Kondele is one part of Kisumu County that is known for its vibrant life. Here, life is fast. However, it is a slow day for Dorothy Ochieng together with her only daughter, Saida Mohammed. Saida is living with the microcephalous condition. It has been a long and tedious journey for Ochieng, who is a mother of 3. But this has not wiped away her motherly smile, which she wears with pride as she walks the tough journey of caring for her daughter.
Maisha imeshakuwa ngumu kwangu. Sijakaa vizuri vile nilizaa huyu mtoto yangu. Sasa watu ya Bwana wako nipenda sana. Tukakaa na baba yawa kidogo. Baadaye nikazaa third born yangu, last born. Akatoroka, akatuacha. Akakimbia akaenda. Sasa nimeshakaa kwa maisha ngumu ya shida. Hata wao watoto yangu wajasoma. Wamefika tu 8 wakadrop hapo.
It all started in 1989 when she was staying with her sister in Nairobi. She had left her native Kisumu County due to a family misunderstanding. After all, no family is perfect. At that point, she was heavily pregnant, almost due.
Vile uchungu ilinianza usiku. Dada yangu hakukua, alienda kazi. Mimi ndio nilikuwa kwa nyumba. Nikamzaa tu kwa nyumba peke yangu. Sasa nikaita mama jirani, akakuja kanisaidia. Akakata ile nini? Akakata. Alafu akamtengeneza. Nikakaa tu na nilifikiri ni mtoto tu. Wakati nilimzaa hivi hakulia. Alikuwa tu kithini na kulia, kawaida ya mtoto. Sasa huyo mama akakuja akakata hiyo kitu, tukamuogesha, nikakaa tu na yeye. Karibu siku 3 ndio nikaenda hospitali. Sasa kuenda hospitali kaona kama masisters wanamuangalia na wanaongea. Sasa kuna sister hapo alikuwa Mjaluo akaniambia huyu mtoto atakuwa na akili mzuri. Na nini yake ilikuwa ndogo, kichwa yake ilikuwa ndogo.
At that point, she felt heartbroken and wanted to leave the baby at the facility, but she later abandoned the idea. Instead of giggles, cuddles, ribbons, and bows that characterized the arrival of a baby girl, her heart was instead filled with sorrow, anger, and disbelief with lingering questions. Saida is now 32 years. However, she cannot do most primary chores due to her condition. Interestingly, she rarely falls sick, but to stay active, she requires frequent therapy that is not often available.
Ilikuanga Dr. Muga, ndiye alikuwa anamuattend. Nilimbukia klinika hapa Russia. Sasa nilikuwa nampelekanga. Daktari alikuwa ananiambia wakati nilishika mimba yake, nilikuwa na shida na problem. Sasa ndio ilimfanya hivi. Stress, alikuwa ananiambia ni stress. Ndio ilimfanya hivi. Nilikuwa nampelekanga tu kwa clinic, anamuangalia vile anaendelea. Sasa nikaenda hapo akaniambia nimpeleke Joyland, nimfanyie assessment. Wakamfanyia assessment. Sasa wakaniambia yeye hata wakati yake ya shule hawezi soma na hao watoto. Mpaka asome tu kwa special school.
Dr. Lee Ogutha is a consultant neurosurgeon and a lecturer at the Maseno University. He describes microcephalous as a condition that can be brought about by many factors. One of the most common signs is a child having a relatively small head.
Okay, so microcephalous is kind of a broad term that we use to describe a head that is large, and essentially one that is larger than average for an individual's age, for their sex, and for their ethnicity. So formally we say if the head circumference, so if you had to take a tape measure and kind of measure the head from the back of the head, the occiput, all the way to the front, the head circumference, if it is more than 2 standard deviations above the mean for that individual's age, sex, or ethnicity, we say you've got macrocephalous. Now, if the head circumference is 2 standard deviations below that same average, then we say you have microcephalous. And it's really a broad term used to describe what you see in a patient or in an individual clinically. Sometimes we talk about percentiles. So we say if the head circumference is above the 98th percentile, then you're dealing with macrocephalous.
In the first trimester during pregnancy, precisely 4 weeks after conception, the neural tube along the baby's neck is closed. The baby's brain and spinal cord then develop from the neural tube as the heart and other organs start to form. The baby's body begins to take on a C-shaped curvature. In week 7 into the pregnancy, the baby's brain and face start forming. Prior to the pregnancy or during these first stages, infections can have a lot of impact on the baby.
Infections include toxoplasmosis, they include rubella, another called the cytomegalovirus, and the herpes simplex virus. So those are infections that mothers can get just before conception or during the first trimester of pregnancy, and these often have an effect on outcomes for the fetus, not just in terms of the brain development, but even in development of other organs, the heart, the kidneys, the genitalia, and so on. And so many of these are easy to identify and diagnose, and mothers would be advised, for example, that if they feel unwell, if they develop a fever at any point in time in pregnancy, they should not ignore it, because if it is something that can be treated, that makes a significant difference in the outcome for the fetus, particularly as far as microcephalous is concerned. Another issue surrounding microcephalous is drug abuse. Maybe not that big an issue in our setting, but cocaine has been identified as one of the drugs of abuse that when a mother is involved with cocaine use or abuse at the time of pregnancy, it significantly increases the risk of having a child with microcephalus.
Achieng is a single mother. She runs a small business that can barely sustain her and her family.
Mimi kama mama lazima nitafute. Nimeishi tu kwa maisha ya shida. Kwanza nilikuanga sokoni Kibuye. Nilikuwa na kibanda tu ya uji. Sasa vile walibomoa Kibuye, hiyo uji yangu ndio nakoroganga. Tangu tu maisha nakoroga uji nauza. Sasa nimerudi kwa nyumba hapa na koroganga hiyo uji natembeza kidogo. Ndio tunapata vile tunakula.
But Saidi's inability to find her way around often leaves Dorothy in deep thought as she worries about her daughter's condition and what lies ahead in life.
Imekuwa ngumu kwa maana ni mtu anakaa hivi. Nilijaribu kumpeleka shule, pesa ikanishinda akakaa tu. Sasa tunakuwa tuna yeye hivi. Na kazi yake ni ngumu. kwa maana hajui chochote. Hata choo nampeleka, namtengeneza, namuogesha. Kitu yenye anajua unaweza kumwekea chakula akule, lakini hakuna chenye anajua tena hapo. Ni mtu hata ukitoka, hata mtu akimfanyia vibaya hawezi kuambia, kueleza fulani amemfanyia kitu mbaya, hajui.
In general, the children who suffer from microcephaly will have neurological challenges. So one will be developmental delays. You might find that they are behind the curve in terms of developing compared to other children. So we're talking about maybe the time a child begins to smile or begins to control their head, begins to sit unsupported. Development of higher functions like speech and higher cognitive functions is usually delayed, and they tend to be behind the curve than as compared to other children, and eventually as compared to other adults of the same age. Lifespan is also a bit shorter for many of these children with challenges, because they essentially grow up with disabilities that are lifelong.
Children born with rare conditions are often stigmatized and alienated from the community. This is mostly due to their physical appearance and their inability to perform some basic tasks. This affects their social interaction and progressive growth.
Huyu mtoto anabaki hapa kwa nyumba, namfungia tu, kwa maana hakuna mwenye nitamwachia. Namfungianga tu kwa nyumba, naenda sokoni. Tukipata chakula amekula, namuacha tu. Na ni mtu tena akikosa kukula ni shida, lazima akule. Ndio vile unaona akona furaha hivi ashakunywa chai. Kama amekosa hiyo chai anapiga kelele. Akona kelele hata ananichapa. Anataka kukula.
Kuna wakati amekuchapa?
Ananipiga. Akona nguvu vile unamuona hivi. Kisirani yake ikipanda, kama akona njaa ananichapa. Ni kelele, hata majirani watashangaa. Atapiga kelele. Anapigana na vitu hapa kwa nyumba kama amekosa kukula.
Lakini hajiumizi mwenyewe. Hajiumizi mwenyewe.
Hajiumizi mwenyewe.
Life for Dorothy was not as tough as it is now because she had a shoulder to lean on, her husband. However, in 2011, the man left. Since then, life has never been the same.
Familia ya bwana wanishughuliki. Hawa walisahau. Mimi niko hivi. Hata naombanga tu Mungu. Sijui pale naweza enda na huyu mtoto. Niko hivi vile unaniona. Na hata hii nyumba, saa zingine dada yangu ndiye ananisaidia na yeye pia kulipa. Kwa maana hiyo uji nauza 10 liters ya uji. Huwezi tukula, tulipe nyumba.
Causes of hydrocephalus, where a child's brain builds with fluid, are common compared to microcephalus. Dr. Ogotha says there is no concrete treatment for microcephalus.
Usually it is supportive care. A lot of the time with microcephaly, you'll find other challenges, particularly epilepsy. Some might have convulsive disorders that can be treated with medication. Others will develop challenges with speech and with their emotional and social development. And that can also be helped with occupational therapy, with speech therapy, and with supportive psychological care. But in general, there is not very much we can do about the head size because it's influenced by the underlying damage to the brain. So in terms of treating that or making that come back to normal, it's usually not possible. And so in general, we offer supportive care. The children will also vary quite a bit in their functional capacity. So you'll find some who are able to function at a higher level than others. And it's really about being able to identify what the child's potential is and to help them maximize that potential while dealing with these other issues. If it's issues with movement, if it's issues with speech, if it's challenges with social interactions and so on. Nowadays, with our advanced imaging capabilities, particularly with ultrasound and even MRI scanning, it's possible to identify that there is a challenge with the child's head circumference. just like we're able to diagnose children with enlarged heads in utero, we can often anticipate that a child's head would be smaller than average for their gestational age while still in the uterus. Usually after birth, within the first 18 to 24 months, it is possible to do the same determination with a simpler method as taking a tape measure like we described earlier and comparing the child's head circumference to the head circumference chart for boys and girls of the same age. Children will track below the mean of the head circumference throughout the time of development, whereas the children with hydrocephalus or microcephalous will track way above the mean for their age and sex.
Long-term therapy and the hidden costs of taking care of a patient who has this condition can be a burden to a family, something that Achieng attests to. Dr. Ogothe says the National Hospital Insurance Fund, NHIF, caters for some costs.
Particularly if they're in a public hospital setting, it will be covered by NHIF if they need occupational therapy or speech therapy, particularly in some of our larger hospitals. That should be catered for by NHIF. In the private setting, of course, the costs vary quite widely depending on which hospital and which particular town. But for these children, regardless of socioeconomic status, it should be possible to find a healthcare center where they can get affordable supportive care. The costs of other treatments, particularly medications, again will vary quite widely, particularly for children who have issues like epilepsy. But in general, it's possible to find a happy medium where you can get effective treatments that are still affordable in our setting.
There is no concrete data on these cases in the country. This makes it difficult to formulate elaborate and mitigative policies.
I don't think we have formal data to cover our country for both microcephalous and hydrocephalus. I think what tends to happen is that we tend to see clusters of these conditions in our larger public healthcare facilities. So if you went to regional referral hospitals in any part of the country, you're likely to see a cluster of children with hydrocephalus. Microcephalus is much rarer. But again, I wouldn't say that we have formally identified any area or any county in the country where we have a higher prevalence of microcephalus. Much of this data is not available in our setting. And a lot of the information we currently use to guide our practice is based on data from other sources outside of our country. And so I think that the healthcare community in collaboration with government can definitely contribute to gathering this information, getting accurate records of what the reality on the ground is, because that will then guide our practice and also guide policy making.
Dorothy Ochieng has not given up on Saide despite her situation. The church community has been her closest spiritual strength, and with time, she has learned to include Saide in this spiritual journey.
Mi nataka huyu mtoto kama anaweza enda hata shule, anaweza hata jaribu aoge peke yake, kwa maana maisha, huwezi jua maisha ya kesho, naweza kuwa siko, na hakuna mwenye atachukua hii kazi ya huyu mtoto. Kazi ya huyu mtoto ni ngumu. Huyu mtoto kazi yake ni ngumu. Saa zingine tumbo ikikuwa mbaya anaenda hapo choo. Hakuna mwenye anaweza fanya hiyo kazi kama siko. Hata tu jana tumbo ilikuwa mbaya, kahara hapa ndani. Na mtu mwingine hawezi kama sio mama yake mwenyewe.
That as a community we have to be aware that some of our children will be born with these challenges and these disabilities, and that the appropriate response is to seek care in a healthcare facility. We still find that there are many people who believe that children who are born with these challenges are the victims of witchcraft or cannot be helped in any way. And yet you find for many of these conditions, we can improve the outcomes, we can reduce the suffering for the children, and get them the best possible outcomes. And so it's also important for the community to understand that should a child be born with a challenge like microcephalous or hydrocephalus or any other condition, that getting them to a hospital, getting them to a healthcare center where there are people with knowledge and expertise can greatly improve their outcomes.
According to the neurosurgeon, educating the public is the biggest investment that should be embraced if we are to mitigate some of the diseases affecting our population.
Mothers need to be very well informed about the importance of getting antenatal care, the importance of good nutrition and nutritional supplementation, particularly with folic acid. And I'm bringing this up from a neurosurgical point of view because we have a lot of conditions, spina bifida, for example, that are mitigated by having adequate folate in diet. So it is not just at the time of conception, but even before conception, mothers should be aware that it is important to maintain good nutrition. Once they are pregnant, it is very, very important for them to be attending regular antenatal clinic so that issues like infections can be dealt with early, maternal weight, maternal blood pressure, maternal blood glucose can be followed up so that any problems are caught early, because all these are contributors to the outcome for the baby. And we find that when you have a situation like microcephaly that is diagnosed after birth, there is very little you can do to intervene. But you'll find that if you might have caught an infection before birth or very early in the pregnancy and treated it in a timely fashion, then you improve the outcomes for the babies.
Wamama wengine wakipata mtoto kama hii wanatupa. Na mimi huyu mtoto yangu nimeshika hivi. Naombanga tu Mungu, kwa maana Mungu amejua vile alinipatia, yeye ndiye alijua sababu.
Having a child is a blessing, and rare conditions bring a lot of uncertainty and anguish within a family. But for Dorothy, she is still hopeful that someday Saida will have a better life. Saad Hassan, KTN News in Kisumu County.
This is KTN News.